Ryan. Ryan is a member of Amalgamated Transit Union 1005, and he's a longtime labor activist and helped organize solidarity committees for almost every major labor struggle in the past 5 years. And he is a member of the National Committee for Socialist Alternative.
So I'm here as everybody else has spoken on different sections of, from the voter amendment, or issues on voters' rights, women's struggle, and LGBT. I'm here to briefly talk about labor. And I think a great way to start off of the situation that exists in the labor movement, the attacks on the right, is to go back to 2010 when Obama was elected and the auto industry had to be bailed out. So this whole argument of a bailout was talking about saving jobs, but in reality what this massive bailout was an overall attack on workers in the auto industry, and this is quite strategic. The auto industry was the last stronghold of the labor movement in the U.S. for the private sector. Through this bailout, in order to save jobs, it was the workers had to accept massive concessions in the auto industry. It was the workers who were forced to pay for the crisis of the CEOs and the capitalist class overproduction in the society. There's more cars than there are needed in this society, and who paid for it but nothing but the auto workers. So when this was done by the Democrats, this opened up a large, massive attack. The right felt emboldened and fully went forward. They used the auto bailouts as a way to attack Democrats for what had happened, the economic crisis. Not only that, with the role the Democrats have played in all these other movements, along with the way they did not stand up for health care rights. Obama, who was supposedly a defender of universal health care, then did nothing to actually organize a fight for universal health care. This led to the disillusionment of the masses that were out to support Obama's election in 2008. And you saw the opening of the door for the Tea Party in 2010 and the elections in 2010, which opened up for the door for the Republicans to win many seats in office. Going to 2011, after all of this disillusionment, the emboldenment of the right, they felt very strong going into 2011 to attack the largest section of organized labor, the public sector. And where this battle, as we all know, started off was in Wisconsin. The one thing is they overcalculated massively. They were not expecting revolts to break out across the globe, and Tunisia and Egypt, which would embolden the working class of the United States to stand up and change the era, or to a new era would dawn in February of 2011 in the United States. The public sector is 37% organized at this point in time right now. Just to go back briefly to talk on the private sector, the attacks in the auto industry, at the heyday of the private sector in the 1950s, it was near 40%. Now it's down to 7%. That was what they would hope would be the nail in the coffin for the private sector. Thankfully, the people of Wisconsin, no matter if you were conservative, no matter if you were liberal, no matter if you were left, they went out in the streets and they fought. They fought to protect the rights of the working class. Sadly, what happened in Wisconsin, because of the lack of this was a new layer of the working class being drawn into struggle, they were learning many lessons, but more importantly, because of the role that the union leadership played along with the Democratic Party, it allowed the movement to be crushed. At the height, there was about 200,000 people in the streets of Madison, a city around the population of 150,000 to 200,000. Basically, the population of Madison had surrounded the Capitol. That is quite significant. What they told everybody to do, just like Obama did after the 2008 election, was to go home, to turn it into, leave it up to the politicians. This allowed the movement to be crushed, as we have seen. It allowed it to be turned into completely electoral tactics. This was, while this was happening, as we all know, it was the Republicans leading the charge in Wisconsin. What was going on at the very same exact moment in Massachusetts is the Democrats completely stripped the rights of labor or of public sector workers in Massachusetts by taking away their right to bargain on health care. So who really is standing up fast? The LGBT, the immigrants, and women when it comes down to it. It is definitely not the Democrats. So this has led to a false idea of a true alternative within our society and the electoral politics. Then come about a month ago in Chicago. What happened was the right-wing agenda was being pushed down people's throats by the Democratic Mayor Rahm Emanuel, who was the former chief of staff for Obama. Many in Chicago would say, oh, well, the reason why Emanuel is the mayor here is because Obama had to kick him out of the White House. Well, that's not true. They're quite close, they're good friends, and in fact, Obama loved him quite a bit. It was much more strategic than that. It was to push forward the neoliberal agenda of privatizing the public sector and privatizing the school system. Just to give an idea of why, a report came out, I can't remember the exact year, but it's about $800 billion that is spent on public education, public and private in the U.S. This is a huge amount of money that the private sector wants to be pried open and reach into, just like every other section of the public sector. If they can eliminate the unions, they can get their hands on all this money. The only problem is, I don't know if Emanuel thought it would be a cakewalk with what had happened in Wisconsin with the complete victory of Scott Walker just a few months earlier than that. But what Emanuel did not realize is there was something different in Chicago that had built up over the last several years coming out of the struggle within the public education system. There was CORE, Caucus of Rank and File Educators, a grassroots section of the union movement that is rooted in the community of Chicago, that have fought with parents, that worked with students to actually provide a good public education. That was the key platform, is actually exposing the corporate agendas that exist on attacking the public school system. They linked many people in the city together, and what you saw at the height of the movement was about 55 to 60% of parents in Chicago all out supporting the strike last September in Chicago, because they didn't keep the issue just to what their working conditions were. They brought it to the political field. They exposed the real situation that was going on. In a great quote that really gives people a taste of what people in Chicago felt, parents, students, and teachers, was a quote by a nurse within Chicago, LaShawn Williams. LaShawn's quote is, "Mr. Mayor, if you cared about the health and safety of our children, why did you allow these schools to be closed down? Why did you allow our kids to be sent to gang-infested neighborhoods? Why did you allow the classrooms without air conditioning? Why is the roof leaking? Why are there not full-time nurses and social workers in our schools? Why do classrooms have over 40 students?" This became the real discussion in Chicago, not about what teachers were paid, but what was going on within the school systems. And just a funny little note, the popularity was so strong that even Emanuel had to respond to absurd, well, I shouldn't say absurd, funny comments. In fact, one teacher came out from CTU with a sign that said, "Rahm Emanuel listens to Nickelback." And they actually had to release a press release, the mayor's office, saying Rahm Emanuel is not a fan of Nickelback. But what CTU shows is if labor actually stood up and actually came out and actually fought on issues on public, actually came out and made statements on, well, they do make vague statements of please vote no on these issues, but if they actually came out and made organized rallies around the both vote no amendments, what if they made a strong statement about the murder of Trayvon Martin and actually came out and organized? The youth is moving into the streets in the United States. They should be supporting the youth, but instead we'll just make vague statements and not really mobilize. That is what CTU did different than what they did in Wisconsin. They actually brought people out to the streets. There are photos of buses flooded with parents, teachers, and students. That is what needs to happen. But more than that, the biggest issue with the union leadership today, I'm going to talk more about the union leadership here than the Democrats and Republicans, is because this is key to fighting the right. If the union leadership, what has gone on is they completely accept the logic of capitalism, that workers must take cuts. If they would come out and make bold statements of, we need to tax the rich, we need to provide a jobs program, and in fact, if they would have made the statement around the bailouts of the auto industry and said, look, we need to completely take over the auto industry under public ownership, democratically controlled by the public, turn it into green technology to expand mass transit to make up for this overproduction of cars and things such as that. It would galvanize a people to embolden them more to come out to the streets. But right now, today, if CTU would come out with a coalition of parents and the broader public of Chicago, left activists, and made a call to actually run candidates against the Democrats in the stronghold of Chicago, it could galvanize many people to come out and vote and actually build a much broader movement. That is one of the biggest goals that we have to do, is build an independent political parties that not only are calling for voting against the Democrats, but actually keeping the movements in the streets and building a much larger mass movement. I'm running short on time here, so I will just kind of quickly say one question that I hope comes up in this discussion is we have to think about, if this movement is not built and these steps are not pushed forward, what are some of the severe consequences that could pop up of the issues of the youth frustration? Where could this break out? What could end up happening if their frustrations are not vented in the correct ways of actually challenging the right? And what could happen?